Let's create another component. This time, we're going to create a drop-down component. And to give us an head start, we're going to make use of Tailwind CSS. So I'm going to copy this first one, which is free to use. Inside the components directory, we're going to create a drop-down.edge file and paste in the markup from Tailwind UI. I'm going to reformat this behind the scene. And I'm back. Just as we did with the modal component, we're going to make this component functional first before making it reusable. This time, we're going to create a dedicated Alpine component directly. So inside the components directory, we're going to create a dropdown.js file. This will be similar to the modal component. So export default. It will have a single data which will be open that will be set to false by default. Then we have two methods. The first one will be a toggle method, which will be used to open and close the dropdown. So this dot open equals not this dot open. What this basically does is, whenever the toggle method is called, we will negate the value of open. That is, if open is set to false, when the method is called, open will be set to true. And if open is true, when the button is called, open will be set to false. This gives us that toggle effect. And lastly, we will have a close method, which will be used to explicitly close the dropdown. So this dot open equals false. Next, let's import it inside app.js. Then register it. Now we can make use of it inside the markup. X data equals dropdown. Then we'll add a click event to the button at click. Once the button is clicked, we'll call the toggle method. Then for the drop-down menu itself, we're going to add X show here. This will point to the open data. So if open is true, we show the drop-down menu. Otherwise, it won't be shown. Now we can make use of the component. Remember in the last lesson, I said there are two ways we can make use of a component. So we have seen the first way, which is to make use of the component tag. The second way is to make use of the component as a tag. So instead of doing this, we'll simply do at dropdown, which is the name of the component. Then we can explicitly close it using the end tag. Or we can self-close it since this doesn't accept anything for now. So we are getting an error. False is not defined. I guess I misspelled false inside dropdown.js. Sorry, this should be false. I bet you saw that. Now we have the dropdown and we can toggle it. You notice clicking outside doesn't close the dropdown. So just as we did with the modal, let me bring this down to the individual lines. So we're going to have a click event here with the away modifier, which we call the close method. Now if we try this, the dropdown will close when we click outside. We're able to make use of the component as a tag this way because Adonis.js will take all the components defined inside the components directory and make them usable as tags, which is the second reason why we named the directory components. Because if we were to rename this to something else and we head back to the browser and refresh, this should break. Just to be clear, let me comment this out for now and refresh. As you can see now, the Edge compiler cannot pass this because it doesn't make sense to it. Under the hood, the Edge compiler will look for components defined inside a components directory. So let's revert this and this. If we refresh this a couple of times, You notice that flickering we got from the modal component. So let's quickly fix that. While we are here, let's add some transition to the dropdown. The interesting thing about Tailwind UI is the fact that it provides something like this for each state of its component. And with Alpine, we can easily do this using the X transition directive. X transition. When we are entering, we set the transition to this. So X transition : enter to target the entering phase. The entering phase starts from this. X transition : enter dash start. Then it ends so what we are doing here is we add an enter transition with these values. Then at the start of entering the transition, we set this value, and at the point at which the enter transition ends, we set this value. So we're going to do the same thing for leaving the transition. I'm going to duplicate this. This will be leave. The leave starts from and ends at this. Now I can get rid of this and try it out in the browser. You notice the transition now. Now let's make the component reusable. I'm going to collapse this to have some real estate. Just as we did with the modal, we're going to have two slots, a trigger slot and the main slot. So everything here will be the trigger slot. Await $slots dot trigger. Then this will be the main slot. Await $slots dot main. I'm going to copy this. Then head over to welcome.edge. This can no longer be self-closed. We will define the content for the trigger slot. The content will be the button we copied. Then the main content will be this. Now, if we head over to the browser, everything should still work as before. And sure it does. Though the component is now reusable, you notice these links are pretty much the same with different content and probably the href. The way it is currently, if we need to say change the class, for example, that means we need to change everywhere it is used in the component, which really isn't very smart. So what we'll do instead is extract the link to its own component. So before we do that, let's create a new drop-down directory and rename this to index.edge and move it inside the drop-down directory. Then inside the drop-down directory, we're going to create a new link.edge file, which will be for the drop-down link component. So I'm going to copy one of the link and paste it over. Let's bring this to the individual lines. This component we have just one slot, which will be the main slot. Await slots dot main. Now let's see how we can make use of it. So instead of doing this, I'm going to make use of the new component. The way we structured the directory, index.edge will represent the main drop-down component, that is this, then every other component inside the directory will be a sub on the main component. That is, the link component will be under the dropdown component. So to access the link component, we will make use of the dot notation, that is at dropdown.link. Again, we can self close or close this explicitly. Then the content for the main slot will be account settings. We can do the same thing for these other two. If we head over to the browser, everything should still work as before. And sure, it does. Now let's make the link component configurable. We want to be able to pass the URL to the link as well as the active state. Remember in the last lesson I said there are two ways you can pass data to a component, and I made mention of props and slots. For I've been looking at slots, now we're going to look at using props. And in the last lesson I made mention that a component accepts two arguments. The first one is the path to the component file, then the second one is the props. Let me use the standard component tag to explain better. So the first argument will be the path, which we've already seen. The second argument will be the props, which we want to pass to the component, or the data we want to pass to the component. So whatever we want to pass to the component, we'll define as the second argument. But since we are making use of the component as a tag, it will accept just one argument, which will be the props. Whatever we pass as argument will be passed down to the component as data, or as props, or as states, whichever you are more comfortable with. So we're going to define two props. The first one will be the href, which we simply set to the £sign. Then we can also set an active state, which we'll set to true for now. But in the real world, we might want to use the request object to check the active state. We're not going to worry ourselves about that in this course. Let's do the same thing for the others. The question now is how to make use of the props inside the component. We can easily get each props using the key that was used to define it. So since we have href and active, we can simply do just href, and the value will be whatever we set it to. Let's set this to something more appropriate so we can visually see the difference. While we are here, let's set this to false. Now they are taking the respective values we defined for them. There are times we would have more than two data that we're passing as props that we want to add as attributes to the components. Having to do this for each of them can be somehow. So Adonis.js provides a convenient way around that. There's a way we can serialize props to HTML attributes instead of having to do them individually, as we are doing currently. We can do that with $props.serialize. The serialize method will serialize all the props into HTML attributes. So the key will be the attribute name, while the value will be the attribute value. In our case here, href will be the attribute name, while this will be the attribute value. Then also, active will be the attribute name, while false will be the attribute value. Again, there are some situations where we don't want to convert all the props to attributes. Say for example, in this our case, we only want to convert this to an attribute, and we don't want that for the active data. So there are two ways we can go about that. We can either use serialize only, then pass the props we want to only serialize, in this case, which will be href. The other way we can go about it is to make use of serialize except. Just like the serialize only, this also accepts an array. We can pass in the props we don't want to serialize. In our case, the active prop. Just so we can see this visually, I'm going to revert to just serialize and head over to the browser, refresh, then inspect the elements. Because we use the serialize method, we have the href attribute and the active attribute added to the list of attributes on the elements. So if I bring this back to except, now you'll notice that we only have the href as part of the attribute. Active is no longer part of the attribute because we have exempted it. Same thing applies to when we use only. You will notice now that we no longer have the href as part of the attribute, but instead we only have active as part of the attributes. In our case is serialized except that we want. So we want to exempt active from being serialized as attributes. Next, let's address how to indicate the active link. We can do that by defining a variable at the top using the set tag. We can call these classes, and we will conditionally set the classes to apply to the link. So we can do $props.active. Remember, we can get each prop directly from the props object. If active is true, we will add this to the class in addition to the base class. Otherwise, it will just be this. Now we can make use of the variable as the class value. I'm doing it this way, that is defining the base classes twice because of when purging Tailwind CSS classes. So if we save this, then head over to the browser, we'd see the first element set as active because that is the one we set as active. If we set the other to be true, then support now should be the one active. To wrap up this lesson, let's create another component for link form. So I'm going to cut this. Then inside the drop-down directory, I'm going to create a new file, which will be form.edge. Yeah, we're not going to make use of any slot. We are simply going to just make use of props. And we want to be able to define two props for this form. The first one will be the action that the form will submit to. Then the second one will be the text the form button will carry. Just as we saw earlier, we can do text and action. If we want, we can also accept a prop for the method, but we won't be doing that in this lesson. Of course, we need to pass this data to the components. First, let's make use of the component at dropdown.form. We are going to self-close it since it doesn't accept any slots. Then we'll pass in the props. The action will be the £sign. Then the text will be sign out. Again, if we head back to the browser and refresh, everything should still be as before. Just to be sure, let's set the action to say /posts. Of course, the form action has been updated accordingly. So that brings us to the end of this lesson and the end of this course. We've seen how to create two different components and touch on various aspects of Edge components. As always, if you have any question, kindly drop them in the comment section below each lesson or use the dedicated discussion forum.